Okay, I am stepping into frame now, so we go ahead and quiet down again. Like I need some music. Hello, I am Gary Brubaker, Director of the Guildhall at SMU. Welcome. We are so glad that everyone is here. The Guildhall is a leading graduate program for video game development, and we would like to welcome you to our Game Changer series. At the Guildhall, we value giving our students a chance to interact and immerse themselves in the industry that they're going to join. These series are part of that, where we bring industry titans to join us and interact with our students and our faculty and staff and our alumni. With that, I am very pleased to announce that we have the Vice President of Marketing from Valve Corporation to speak with us today, Doug Lombardi. He has written his bio, and well, let's just get to it. So after years in the music industry, he decided to get a real job. Fortunately for us, he came to his senses and decided to go into the game industry. He started in 1994 as a freelance journalist for magazines, if you remember what those are, New Media, CD-ROM Today, and was a launch editor of Boot magazine, which is Maximum PC Today. In 1998, he accepted a job at Sierra Online as brand manager for two small titles from two small companies that nobody had ever heard of. Perhaps you may have heard of them, though. One of them was Relic's Homeworld, and the other is, of course, Valve's Half-Life. At the end of 1999, Doug accepted a job at Valve, where he is now, as I said before, VP of Marketing, and he has many responsibilities that he helps with. And so get this list: managing third-party relations, marketing, press activities, project management for all of Valve's game titles, Steam, and upcoming Steam hardware. So that's a little bit of what Valve does. And with that, I would like to welcome Doug.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here at one of the world's premier programs for game design and development. And so it's an honor to be here and to have a chance to talk to you guys about some of the things that we've taken as our common practices at Valve in terms of thinking about shipping, and some of the ways that we've expanded the platform of Steam to help folks like yourselves who are trying to get their break in the industry and to find a place working and making a living and living the dream, if you will, in the industry. So Gary covered a bit of my first slide, or my second slide, actually. But here's sort of an agenda of what I was going to run through today. Just real quick introductions, talking about myself, which I'll probably blow past because Gary did a good job of doing that. Then I want to talk a little bit about what shipping means and why it's important. I think there's some pretty widely held misconceptions about what shipping is, and I think people in their heads have the bar a little too high. So I'm going to try and knock that down a little bit for you guys and show you that shipping can mean a lot of things, and they're all pretty equally important, and it's more part of getting in the rhythm of getting your work out there and making the decisions that are needed to make to put something out in the world and to get that feedback and to have folks consume your work. Then I'm going to talk some of the ways about actually shipping your product, getting published, and some of the ways that Steam has made that happen and some of the things we've developed there. Then I'm going to sort of quickly talk about the most important part about shipping and then take some questions from you all. So Gary sort of rolled through all of this pretty quickly. So I'm just going to punch right through it and move on. So what is shipping? I think, as I mentioned, I think people in their heads, they hold this idea of shipping as, producing that big AAA commercial launch title. that has that $50 or $60 price point. It is available on multiple platforms. Its poster is in the window at GameStop at Christmas time, etc. And, that is shipping. But that's only one form of shipping, and it's kind of the holdover from the old days. That was the only way we could do it when I was young, and some of the other people in the room who are my contemporaries, were getting our start in the industry back in the 90s when the only pathway was that $50 game that went to retail that you worked on for years and cost millions of dollars to produce, had to get greenlit by a publisher, had to have a retail team to get out there and whatnot. Well, lucky for you guys in your generation that's coming up, things like Steam and Xbox Live and the other channels and platforms that look like that have lowered that bar considerably and moved you guys as the content creators much closer to consumers and the gamers. And they've done a great job of removing the middlemen and the gatekeepers and the folks that sort of, were part of this process in the old world before, the proliferation of the internet as a distribution channel. But also created barriers, not intentionally, from folks getting their work to people. And there were sort of just so many obstacles that were in the way of developers and content creators to get their work out there, and more importantly, to get the compensation for their hard work. So that's really sort of in a nutshell, if you will, sort of my thesis statement for what we're going to talk about today, is sort of to look at some of those things and to get you guys thinking in other ways about what success can mean for you, and to sort of maybe start thinking about setting achievable goals and taking different paths to get there. Because believe it or not, some of these other paths that you may not be thinking about could actually be more profitable for you, both in the near term and in the long term, than going down the big commercial Half-Life, Halo, Call of Duty, AAA launch title, the cover boy title. So, when I think of shipping, having been involved in magazines in the Stone Age, and then working at CNET when the internet first came out, and everybody that I worked with at the magazines told me crazy that I was going to work at a website. Like, yeah, those are going to be around for a long time, right? And then also moving on to doing marketing on the publisher side, and then also working with Valve doing project management and marketing and PR there. Shipping is anything you put out for public consumption, right? Everything you have to make a decision on, everything you have to call final, anything that you're going to put out there is a representative of your work or as your work. So I always think of shipping as, is it the key hero art? Is it screenshots? Is it the website? Is it a text description of what you're making? Is it a new skin for another game? Is it an item for the workshop? All those things count as shipping. You're making decisions about what you think a potential customer will want, what an audience is going to want, how they're going to think about that product. You're coming down and putting those things together and then putting it out there for the world to consume. And something just on that small level, even if you're not charging for it, you're putting it out there, right? And you're sort of putting yourself out there. And that's just a really big thing that I want to sort of hammer home as we go through, is that ship stuff and you'll learn stuff, right? It may not go to the top of the charts. It might not end up with you, with an oceanfront home and a Ferrari, but you'll learn something from it. And that can be just as important for your career long term as you're getting into this industry. You'll always learn something by shipping something, and there's power in knowledge, right? Everybody knows that. Another motto that we try to live by, and I do say try, is to ship early and ship often. Again, this is when the things are, you're making those tough decisions. Things are coming to a head. You have to decide what to put out. Is it version A? Is it version B? Et cetera, and making those decisions. As a team, as an individual, depending on your product, you're making those calls. And the more often you're doing those things, the better you'll get at doing them. It's a natural sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that if you get into this mode of holding on to things too long, which I think is this slide, the first point, if you get into that old school fine arts world of a painter doesn't show his work until it's final, you're going to sort of put yourself in this stasis, paralysis, and not really be an effective producer of content, right? The most successful people are the people that are shipping something all the time, whether it's updates, new maps, new trailers, new screenshots, all those things. They're shipping, they're in that rhythm, right? They're producing, they're becoming much more prolific, and that sort of will lead you to other places. The other thing that I really want to hammer in with this audience in particular is you guys are young, right? I'm an old man, right? I've got a mortgage, I got a house, I got a family, I got all this stuff to worry about. So everything that I do at my, late age or middle age, we'll say, has a consequence to it. You guys are coming straight out of school. The world is yours. You guys can fall and you're like rubber balls. You'll bounce right back up, right? So this is your time. This is your chance in your career to take a chance to really take some risks in your design, in your art choices, everything. And I really want to encourage people to really sort of follow their creative instinct, the things that they think they might want to go after, because too often folks make the mistake of thinking, I'm going to do the safe thing while I'm young so I can become successful, and then when I'm older, I'm going to be able to take risks, right? I'm sure probably half the people in this room, if not more, have that already locked in their head, as that's the safe conservative approach to go on. But it actually is the other way around. You're more free now than you ever will be, and the world is more open to you than it ever will be. The other thing, too, is the more risks you take now, the more you will learn, right? And you want to always be learning, and when you're older, you want to be able to say, I've ruled those things out. In a relationship, in a project, anything, the most important things you can know are the things what's not going to work, right? What is going to work, what is the grand thing, is always a little bit elusive, but the process of elimination works pretty well. And if you're taking those risks early on as you get older, you'll have that knowledge to work off of and to be able to eliminate things and be able to say, no, that's a rat hole, been down there, tried that before, we're going to eliminate that, and that will help keep you out of trouble on things going forward. My last line here is, more times than not, you'll learn more from a flawed launch than you will learn from a perfect launch, right? A perfect launch is great. Things go out, everybody loves it, it's out there, cash is flowing, what have you. That's all great, but you may not learn anything at all, and sometimes you can come out of those experiences saying, well, that was a great success, but how the heck are we going to build on that? Because we didn't really learn anything on that. And then you have to start going through and sort of saying, okay, we got to figure out all the things that did work, and hopefully we're able to replicate those things again. And again, those things can sometimes be a little bit nebulous, whereas flaws and mistakes and things that go terribly wrong are pretty concrete. They're pretty black and white. You know how to avoid them again once you've seen them before. So, past to ship, that I'm going to go into. Here's a quick list of them. You guys are probably pretty familiar with these. And again, my thing is that I really want to not discount the top one, because it is still valuable and it is still viable and a big part of our industry. But these other pieces that are below it are becoming bigger and bigger pieces of our industry every year. And I'll just sort of quickly go through each one of those for us. So everybody knows this model, right? The path to ship of the AAA title, it's tens of millions of dollars all in to produce it, right? Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, I think folks know this, we probably released this information. If not, it's been long enough I can say it now. They had marketing budgets of over $20 million. Just the marketing that I spent to buy TV and whatnot for that game on behalf of Valve was over $20 million, right? So you can imagine the production budget and everything else that went into it. We're talking a lot of cash, and it's hard to get access to that level of cash. They were also in production for years. They were large teams. They were, connected to publishers and retailers that were also part of the process. Again, extending sort of, the number of people involved in having a critical success. The keys, how many people are now playing a part in your product's success. Retailers, online distributors, platform holders, certification, all those things, just barrier. And they're not insurmountable, but again, they're things that are putting you one step further away from your customer, which is your end goal, which is to get the gamers playing your game, talking about it, and compensating for your work. Ratings is another part of that as well that goes with shipping worldwide. And in the States, ratings can be pretty straightforward as we go around the world. There's lots of other things to navigate. And if you're trying to produce something on the scale, again, without the help of a publisher or a partner who understands how to get a game rated in Germany or in other parts of the world, those things can be really huge barriers that will stop you up. And Germany is the #2 territory in the world for video games. So, these are all things that you have to consider that live outside of the game when you're going AAA. Mr. Nix, you late? The indie game is something that has propped up, really well in the age of the online distribution platforms, and it is a great avenue for folks in this room and folks of your age who are coming out. What's great about the indie game is it can be any price. It can be any size. It doesn't have to live up to that $60 price point threshold. It has to have this many hours of play, and it has to have single player and multiplayer, et cetera, and all those, those usual trappings that, the checkbox on the back of the product sheet that it has to hit to be a full AAA title. It can be an idea. It can be a level, right? It can be just single player. It can be just multiplayer. You can publish it directly. The team size can be whatever you want. Marketing can all be done grassroots. It can all be done online. And can be released, via any of the outlets that are out there now, whether it's Steam or Xbox Live and their new ID project and what have you that's out there. There's a lot of great choices for gamers to get out there and get their work directly to gamers now through these online platforms. And it's interesting to note that the year-over-year growth of indie game sales on Steam is percentage-wise going up exponentially each year, both in terms of the revenues and the unit volume on Steam. So not only is it a great pathway for you guys right now, it's going to continue to be an even better pathway as things go forward. Because guess what? Gamers like things that are more ambitious creatively. They want to play something new and different. They're not necessarily all ready to play 20 hours worth of content or dedicate that much time to it. They're not all necessarily willing to spend $60 before they know whether or not they even like this game, right? So an indie title, as a lot of you here are very sure are familiar with, allow that lower barrier for both you as content developers, but also for gamers as consumers of those products. There's not as much risk for them in this. They don't have to invest the time and the dollars and everything else to get there. And great ideas can be born out of indie games that can later on become a bigger game built on their success. They can even become bigger games in and of themselves with, the current version can grow and add over time. And you can make those things up in volume or even changing price. Price is a great fluctuator that, unfortunately, I didn't think to keep in too much. But online is a great place to experiment with price points as well. And you have much greater flexibility there than you might when you're going to a commercial market where there's set price points and standards for things. And it's much slower to be able to execute things like the Steam Summer Sale and stuff like that that allow you to really do creative ways of experimenting with price. Another great way to look at shipping is workshop items. These can be produced for virtually, no money at all, no budget. They can be done in your spare time. They're impulse price points. They're $1, $2, what have you. So the bar has been greatly reduced on stuff. If you're making a new hat for TF2 or something like that, it can be totally fun and something that's produced in a matter of hours or a couple weeks. And again, these don't need any publisher relations at all involved in them. There's really no marketing that's required for them. They get put into the game pool. They get aggregated to those customers. And you have a built-in audience to ride upon, which is so key. We've seen so many people come through that world, to be able to expand out of that and to really find a place where they can make a living, all unto themselves. I think I get to the point at some point, but I'll mention it here as well. We recently announced that I think it's 3 years since Workshop launched, we have paid out to the developers over $53 or $54 million to 1,500 contributors in something like 40 countries around the world from Steam Workshop alone. And that is only growing as time goes by. There are people who are just simply workshop creators and they make 6 figures a year. It's a great place to think about being, especially if your skill set maps well to that sort of a marketplace. If you're sort of an artist and a coder combo, or you have an artist and a coder team that work really well together, a two-man team, this can be a great avenue for getting out there. And not only is it a great place to get your work out there, but it can also just be a great place to get picked up, right? If you make a really successful item on Steam Workshop, chances are you're going to get a call from somebody, and Valve may be one of those people on there. It may be somebody else who's watching that game, and they need somebody who can produce items like what you're making. So it can work both for you financially as an immediate compensation thing, but it can also serve as your entree into a great position at an existing studio doing the thing that you love. Mods are items for mods is another great place to get started. Again, very little to zero production costs on these. You have a built-in installed audience. If you're building a mod on top of a game like Half-Life or Quake or any of the modern games, Skyrim, what have you, you have an instant audience to publish to. And while these might not be a direct line of compensation to you financially, they can be a great springboard for you. We've hired numerous level designers from the mod community. Pretty much all the level designers on Half-Life 1 were from the mod community. They're from the Quake mod community. We've picked up many games from the mod communities, wholesale, right? Counter-Strike started off as a mod. Dota started off as a mod. Team Fortress started off as a mod. They're a great springboard for teams and individuals, and it's a great way to get your work out in front of customers, which again is going to give you that knowledge that's going to make you more successful down the road. And again, that barrier to entry has been greatly reduced in this world, and a lot of things are just built in there for you to take advantage of right off the bat. So all of these things are great, great areas to go into, and because we've seen this and been around this stuff, and we have the fortunate, ability to work with a platform like Steam, we've tried to lean into those different camps of product types, if you will, for folks to ship. Steam Greenlight is one of those things that's out there, largely for independent games as a pathway to go through. When we first started, publishing on Steam, there was 3 or 4 Valve titles on there. And then we went through one by one trying to begging people to put their titles on Steam. And the good guys at Ritual were kind enough to work with us to put the Sin episode pack up there. Dylan Fitter, who created AudioSurf, was kind enough to give us his work and take a chance on us and put it on there. And then after a while, when Steam proved itself as a viable pathway for publishing for third-party developers and indies, we started to become overwhelmed. Right, there were just too many titles coming in for us to sift through and to try to be, deciders upon, and try to, we found ourselves being gatekeepers and sort of, a stopgap, if you will, in the process. So Greenlight was just one of the ways that we sort of came up with to try and sort of help, get more input from the community to help us make decisions to get these titles through. And we've grown it over time and tried to expand on it and improve it and try to get more tools in publishers or in developers and content creators' hands to help them get through more quickly. So when we first started, Greenlight, we were able to publish, I think it was, or Greenlight, something like 20 titles every couple of months like that. And we've been working on that and improving on that. And to date, over 3,500 titles have been submitted to Greenlight have been greenlit. Over 3,500 titles have actually been greenlit. And about 1/6 of them have actually been published onto Steam. And this is only in just a couple years, right? I think Greenlight launched in something like 2012 or something like this. So we've really been able, to help folks find another pathway through directly, to Steam and to get an audience there. It's a place to do audience development, to track feedback for folks, to get your games published. And we've tried very hard to sort of get ourselves out of the way as the folks that are deciding what games go through and whatnot, and using the community as a place to help us make those decisions on what they want and what they want to play. Another more recent, I'm off course. So one of the questions I get from folks, both here and otherwise, is, how do I get my game on Greenlight, right? Getting your game on Greenlight is pretty easy, right? There's a form to fill out, you upload your code, and it's up there for folks to see. The real trick is getting your game greenlit, right? And that's a process that I think developers need to step back a little bit from their actual work and their content and start to become marketers of their own work. And they need to think about how they're communicating to folks, when they're communicating to folks. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail later in this presentation. But like anything else, winning on Greenlight is the same recipe as it is for any other game. You have to have a compelling title in the first place. Right? It has to be an interesting idea. It has to be an interesting mechanic. There's got to be something about it that makes people want to check it out. Then, as I mentioned, you have to have a compelling story for your game, for your project. Right? What's unique about your team? What's unique about this game? Why do gamers care? Why should they give up their time and their money for your project when there's literally, over 5,000 other titles on Steam alone right now for them to give their money and their time to? When you think about these things on marketing to Steam, what I always try to think to folks is, put in your brain, when is the right time to market that title? When is the right time to come to Steam Greenlight? And to think about, how you're going to present your title. Again, put your marketing hat on. It's your title. Nobody knows it better than you, right? So you should really be able to be the best person to talk about it and to be the best evangelist for that title. And so think about these things like the communication, the screenshots, the trailers, getting the press on board. Again, coming up with your story, right? I'm going to talk later on a little bit about how we've approached this with some of our titles. But there's classic pieces that you can put together that you see people do with stories, right? With Portal, for example, a great example that I love to use, we had the story of these kids coming from DigiPen with this great student project called Narbacular Drop. And we met them through some of our folks going to their senior showcase, their class showcase at graduation, and looking at their projects, their class projects, similar to what you all do in your cohorts. And brought them in, and basically they were hired on the spot, and a group of folks from Valve were sort of put at their disposal to work for them to help them create their dream and take Narbacular Drop to the next level and then create Portal. And that in and of itself was a press story, right? That was something that was able to get people talking about this game in and of itself, and it had nothing to do with the gameplay at all. But it was an interesting hook to get them on the map and for press to start writing about it, and then in turn for gamers to start writing about it. So think about what your story is as well as what your game story is when you're marketing stuff. And I'll go a little bit deeper into this as well on the marketing side. Early access is another avenue that we have on Steam that's out there for indie developers. It's sort of a blend, if you will, of sort of like a Kickstarter with Greenlight in a sense. That it allows folks to actually get their work up and out and in the hands of gamers while it's in production. So this is important on a couple of levels. One, it allows you to test your ideas before you waste 2 years of your life and whatever money you're putting into this project. You can get that feedback and that instant response from customers before you go down that road. So you can build a simple level with an example of that gameplay and put it up on early access for whatever price you want and start to collect that feedback and use that feedback to shape your project as you're going forward. It's incredibly powerful. It's used by a lot of folks. We've used extended betas with games like Dota 2 and whatnot to help us understand what's working and what's not working. As I mentioned before, identifying the what's not working is so valuable because time is money. And if you're investing your time developing stuff that ultimately isn't going to resonate with customers, there's nothing worse than that. So early access allows you to bypass that completely and get that feedback and start making those decisions earlier on in the process. Testing before a really wide audience potentially, and also getting paid for your work in the process of building it and not deferring the compensation until the end of the project itself. As I mentioned, both of these are great ways to get your big break. There's sort of decisions that you have to make on when and where and which pathway to go through, obviously, for each of these. These two are probably the two closest in a sense that they're kind of specifically tuned and optimized for the indie game projects. A lot of it comes down to, where are you in development, whether or not early access will make sense for you or not, how comfortable you are, sharing your work at what point. So those are decisions, and there's trade-offs along the way as you look at these two against each other. But I think they're great things for folks to look at, and we're seeing these types of things take hold in other forms of internet distribution systems as a popular way to get and embrace and support the indie community. And the great thing about it is we're in our infancy with this stuff, right? Greenlight and early access are only what's available today. 5 years from now, hopefully folks like yourselves and the generation developers coming behind you will help push us and give us ideas for other ways to do this. Other services will come up with great ideas and ways to do this. You're still at the early stages of the internet as a distribution system in the overall grand scheme of things. And these channels and pathways for independent developers and young developers to get their start are going to become bigger, more viable, and more robust as time goes forward. So your future's so bright, you got to wear shades, right? So I mentioned before a quick sidebar on marketing. Just hold your fire. So as I mentioned, the key thing is to, know your title. As the content creators, you guys should know your title better than anything, right? You know what's going to work. You know where the passion of the project is. And so your challenge in marketing, which, largely in today's world is the biggest challenge because there's literally 1,000 titles being published every year, is you got to stand out from the crowd. You got to compete for the press's attention. You got to compete for gamers' attention, etc. So you've got to sort of pick your spots on when to market the title, right? And how to market the title. I see way too often people announce a title or a project the minute they've thought of it, right? And it's a kind of a fire and forget. Like, here's a screenshot and here's an announcement and we'll get back to you on the details later, right? So in a sense, maybe they've wasted that opportunity because they're banking that folks are going to come back whenever they get around to putting out their trailer, their demo, or their next set of screenshots, that folks are going to actually remember that first shot that they fired whenever the heck that was, right? So I strongly encourage people to think of this as a campaign and to lay out the plot points of when it's important to drop these pieces on the press and on the public, right? Bundle up your campaign. You got some screenshots? Great. Put that in the tank. Where's your trailer? Great. Put that in the tank, right? You got your rude Q&A put together on how you're going to talk about the project. You've got your story put together. Great. Now bundle all those things up. You have them in your arsenal. Now lay out your timeline strategically against the project, when it's going to ship, when you're going to launch it on early access or on Greenlight, and make those things coincide so that you can create an event and have an impact that's driving towards a goal, not just serving the purpose of the team and their collective egos of saying, we've got an idea, we've got a team, we need to announce. That's non-strategic, right? It's a common thing. It's a desire that all of us have. We feel excited and proud about our ideas and getting teams together. But strategically, when you're thinking of the best interest of the product, that may or may not be the best thing, and in most cases, it's not. As somebody who's worked on both sides of the publisher and the developer, excuse me, I've often found myself, in these conversations where folks are saying, well, we've got to do this and this and this because it's important. When I was on the publisher side, because this is what's important to Sierra, with the publisher that I was at, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd go over and I'd visit with Valve, and they'd say, well, we got to do this, this, and this, because this is important to what Valve's trying to do and whatnot. And myself as an ambassador sitting between the teams, both when I've been there or when I've been at Valve and working with outside developers like Ritual or other folks like that, I've always said, all that is noise. What's important is the product, right? Back up a second. Don't think about your team. Don't think about yourself. Think about the product, and always align your goals with marketing and everything else around what's going to be best for the product. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what Sierra thought their goals were or what maybe Valve thought their goals were when they were getting along. If Half-Life was successful, everybody's goals were going to happen, right? When it won Game of the Year and it was the 10th game of all time to cross the 1 million unit line, that's when things happened, and everything else was totally noise. So whenever there's a conversation within the team or whatever, and folks disagree, take a step back and say, what's best for the product? Because if the product wins, we all win. Right? So that's just a great sort of positioning space, a headspace to get into before you get started with your stuff. I want to get into an example, or a couple examples about how we've sort of come down to talking about some titles that hopefully you guys know and have maybe played. Left 4 Dead and Portal. These were two sort of more difficult games for us to market. And they were games that came later in Valve's history. We had already had the success of Half-Life 1 and 2. Counter-Strike was the #1 online played game in the world. Steam was starting to take off. Team Fortress was on the map as a mod turned into a semi-commercial product, and we were working on TF2. And Portal comes along. And I try to pitch this game to a bunch of people, retailers, the press, what have you, and talk to them about it, and eyes glaze over. Right? I'm saying you're in this facility, you're like a lab rat, and you got this gun, and you can manipulate space, and it's like a 3D puzzle and stuff, and people are just going like, that sounds miserable, right? And that was the better version of their reaction, right? More commonly, it was like, I don't get it, tell me again, right? And hopefully I could get them to a place where they thought they got it, but their reaction was, that sounds miserable, right? Left 4 Dead was a similar situation where we said, okay, it's co-op only. There's extreme highs and lows in the game. It's pretty brutal in the way Counter-Strike was, but it's incredibly fun, and you get this team camaraderie out of it, right? You could show a trailer, you could show a screenshot, I could talk to you till I'm blue in the face about it, but you wouldn't get the magic of Left 4 Dead. And really quickly, we found that when 4 people sat down and played it together in the same room, they would have that magical experience of yelling at each other. Somebody shoots the police car, the horde comes rushing out, and somebody on the team goes, who the, you know what, shot the car and triggered the horde. And then everybody's screaming, their heart rates collectively go up together, and they either get wiped out, which is okay, or they win and they keep moving on. But all of a sudden now they're a unit, they're a team, right? And the power of the game has come through to them. So we flipped instantly to saying, trailers for this game, yeah, that's fine. We need to do them. It's a staple you got to do. But when we go to E3 and when we go to all these other places, people have to sit down and play this game as a group of 4, seated right next to each other. And if you ever saw us during that time or saw Left 4 Dead 1 or 2 during its promotional period and pre-launch periods, it was always that setup. It was like I was on an airplane with a bank of 4 machines and 4 chairs everywhere I went around the world to show off this game. And it worked, right? And so then the idea of this demo became the paramount thing, because then we were able to transport that experience to people around the world over Steam. So that's what worked there. What ultimately worked with Portal was sort of the opposite. And we were sitting around having lunch, a group of us one day, and we're going down the list of what are you working on and how's it going, usual stuff that happens at a studio. And folks said, so how's Portal going? You've met with some press and some folks at the publisher and stuff, and what do they think? It's awesome, right? And I was like, people aren't getting it. They either look at me, with their eyes glazed over, going, I have no idea what this means, or they say, wow, that sounds miserable. I have no desire to play that whatsoever. And so one of the guys in the room said, I think I have an idea. And it was a Friday afternoon. This is one of these magic moments in video games. The guy says, I think I have an idea. And on Monday, I come into the office, and he's got a very, very crude version of this, which is the final version of his idea that he had that he went and prototyped over the weekend.
Welcome to the Aperture Science Enrichment Center. Let's look at some of the challenges you'll face as a test participant. You may be required to perform simple tasks, such as locating an exit. These simple tasks may be supplemented with insurmountable obstacles. Thanks to the Aperture Science handheld portal device, the impossible is easy. Let's look at a real-world example. Certain objects may be vital to your success. If at first you don't succeed, you fail, and the test will be terminated. When stuck, remember our motto, there's a hole in the sky through which things can fly. At the Enrichment Center, we believe that a highly motivated test subject can carry out rather complex tasks while enduring the most intense pain. So in case you don't make it through the testing, goodbye. This next test is impossible. Now you're thinking with portals.
So in 2 minutes and 22 seconds, we got you there. All made in-house. It was a group of about 4 or 5 people. You had the great Eric Wolpaw writing the commentary for Gladys. You had the VO actress doing Gladys. You had one 2D artist, I believe, from inside the team. And then you had the lovely and talented Jeep Barnett, who was one of the original DigiPen kids who came over, who's just a total badass ninja when it comes to playing the game, doing the trick moves in there. And it's cut all in-house, in a week or so. And we used those 2.5 minutes or 2 minutes and 20 seconds for the next year to sell that game. And that was it, you know. And no agency, you know, no large budget, nothing like that. Just super grassroots group of people inside of the team figuring out how to communicate the game, use a little humor to get the point across. And, you know, the star was born. So that talks a little bit about the pathways of stuff and how to talk about your games, way to, you know, sort of identify what's working and to sort of use different mediums to get your point across, to get your name on the map, all that kind of stuff. Another thing I think that's important specifically for this audience, and I take this right off a list of questions that came from your partner earlier this year, who was asking me about some stuff as they were thinking about what they were going to do with their latest cohort project. And this was basically a very, very small version of the email I sent back to him, which was, you know, you have these projects, you have your ability when you're coming out to do some things and to make some decisions, right? And the ultimate goal is to start your own company, you know, launch multiple IPs, drive a Ferrari, have an oceanfront home, and all that kind of stuff, and we all live happily ever after. You save the princess and everything else, right? And then we have cake, right? But, you know, that's not where you start. That's where you finish, you know? Set achievable goals for yourself, and you'll reach those goals. You know, when you're starting off, if you reach for the stars, it's kind of hard to reach them, right? You got to build a ladder or that stairway to heaven, to use a cheesy old rock and roll metaphor, right? So identify down, you know, what it is you want to do. I talked to some of the classes earlier in the week, and obviously I'm losing my voice because I've been hearing the sound of it too often this week. I apologize for that. But I mentioned to the class earlier this week about if you can't write down the main thrust or the main idea for your game on the back of your business card, you don't know what you're building yet. In a similar way, if you can't write down on the back of your card or your business card what it is you're trying to do right now with your work, it's going to be really hard for you to get there. And here are some of the things that I think you can think about when you're coming out with your cohort projects as to what it is you're actually trying to do. And there may be other things beyond this list. Excuse me. But when you focus this down, the way you focus down the idea of your actual game, you're going to be much more, you know, intentional about your actions, right? When you know your ultimate destination, your chances of getting there are much better, whereas if you get in the car and say, I'm going to go somewhere fun tonight, the chances of you finding fun tonight may or may not happen, right? So say to yourself right now, as I'm coming out of the Guildhall, I've got this great degree from one of the premier programs in the world for game development. What do I want to do with this experience and this body of work that I'm doing? Do I want to get a job? Do I want to launch a company? Do I want to enter this in a contest that's going to be my springboard? Or is it something else? And then dedicate everything you're doing after that goalpost. Stay completely focused, be the ball, right? You're going straight after it, and until you get there, nothing's going to stop you. Don't get distracted by other stuff, and just keep moving until you get there. And then as soon as you get there, set the next goal and start moving towards that one. And these are things that just sound really stupid, right? Like I feel like I'm old grandpa up here telling you really basic common sense things. But, you know, we're all really passionate in this world, and especially in this industry. And there's so many opportunities, and there's so many distractions. It's really easy to get off those base block and tackle types of things. And sometimes, you know, it's really important to not answer an email, to wait before you reply. Don't be in a rush to reply to an email. Think about it before you reply to it. Don't be in a rush to make a product decision or a career decision. Take some time to think about it. Call timeout. This isn't like a basketball game where you only get 5 per half. You get as many as you want. And calling timeout and taking the time to think about things before you make the next step is crucial. Also ask questions of folks when you're going to do a pitch or when you're going to do a meeting. We talked about this yesterday with some of the folks that were there. You get that big meeting with the publisher to go in and pitch your game, and you're like, great, this is awesome. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday. I'm going to be there. And all you do is go and start making assumptions about what the hell you think you're going to do at 2 o'clock on Tuesday. The first thing you should do is say, I'm going to make a list of questions for the person that invited me to this meeting and ask who's going to be in the room, what have they seen lately that they liked or didn't like, what kind of titles are you guys after, etc. And try and get a focus for what you're going to do in that meeting. That's one example of a specific thing. but you can take that and extend that to everything that you're going to do in your career and all the projects you're going to work on with teams. And it's a critical, like I say, it's a basic thing, but it's a critical thing to always keep in mind and always sort of back up a step, especially when things are tight and tense, and allow yourself that moment to get that clarity. I think I sort of hit on this a little bit already, so I'm going to skip through that one. I also mentioned that already, so we'll skip through that one. We talked a little bit about this, with Team Workshop already, with, sort of the ability for folks to go through this, and I'm going to hit it again, which is why I put the slide up a second time. Folks, Professor Adkins and I were talking last night about this. Anything you guys do is going to have an extendability, right? You only have, let me put this another way. Everything that you guys do, you're going to be able to manage yourself and your time or not. And there's a critical point there as to how you're managing yourself and your time on a project, right? There's this evil badge of honor in our industry right now that says, if I have 10 hours of PTO and he's got 20 hours of PTO, somehow or another he's cooler and is working harder than I am. Well, I don't really subscribe to that, right? I think that actually means that he's going to get burnt out more quickly than I am, and he's going to be less valuable to his team. Not to pick on you, Steve, but you were late. You were late, right? And you probably got the fastest car of anybody in the room. But anyway. When I used to play music, I had a writing partner that I worked with for years. Still keep in touch with them, and occasionally we get back together and write music together and what have you. And we learned really on, we were poor, living in rat-infested apartments in San Francisco and doing nothing but trying to write our next song. We wrote 300 songs in the course of like 2.5 years, trying to search for that hit that was going to make our big break. And we learned pretty quickly on that if we were only playing music and writing songs with each other, that we were going to fall into a trap, and our ability to write interesting songs was going to be limited by that, right? So I would go over to Berkeley and I would play with an African reggae band. I was the bassist and whatnot, and I would extend my ability that way. He would play with new age performance groups in San Francisco, and he was the synthesizer player, and go all Brian Eno and crazy over into that land. And then we would come back together and we would have some new tricks in our bag to bring to our songwriting collaboration process. Right? Workshop is a way for you as an individual to sort of do that thing outside of your team. Whether you're on a team or not, if you have an idea for something, you can chase that as a moonlighting thing or in your spare time and get it published and out there, whether or not it's for the compensation or just for that creative outlet and to get feedback from people and to ship other stuff. So it's one avenue out there for folks to be thinking about all the time, and there's other ones like that. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is to always think about what else you can be doing to grow yourself as an artist, as an engineer, as a game designer. And it doesn't necessarily mean giving, if 50 hours to the team is great, 60 hours is better. I actually think the opposite is true. If you're giving 50 hours to your team, that's great. But what are you doing with your other hours to expand, go out and collect other tools so that when you come back to give those 50 hours to the team, you've actually got something to give them, both in terms of being fresh and clear in your head and not sleep deprived and slightly crazy, which I have been many times in my career, and I'm speaking from experience on this, and you guys probably think I'm crazy right now. But it's one of those things to do for your soul, for your head, and for your bag of tricks, most importantly, right? The folks that play the greatest athletes are good athletes, period. Right? They're not just good basketball players or good baseball players, right? Most great athletes played multiple sports in high school. As game designers, you should think of yourselves in those same terms, right? You're not just an FPS level designer, right? You're a level designer, right? Learn how to make levels for other types of games, and then when you come back to your FPS team, you'll have those new bags of tricks to draw from and to pull from. And then my last point here is to remind folks the most important thing about shipping is you're never done shipping, right? Folks always think like we're going to, again, going back to the first slide, we're going to get this deal from a big publisher. It's going to be $20 million. We're going to work for 3 years. We're all going to work 100 hours a week. We're going to ship the game, and then we're going to be done with it. The money's going to roll in. I'm buying my Ferrari and driving to my house on the coast. Well, that's the fairy tale, right? That's not the reality of the situation. As I've mentioned in the previous classes this week, the moment you actually ship the game is when you're going to start learning about stuff and when you're actually going to be able to make changes and do the work that is probably the most interesting work that you can do for your game. So shipping is just the point at which you should think about you're actually going to start your wide beta testing, right? And you're going to start collecting things and figuring out what really works and figuring out how you're going to be able to expand your game. This is particularly true with multiplayer titles, obviously, but it's also true with single-player titles as well, right? New level packs, DLC, all that stuff keeps your game alive, extends the player count, draws up your audience, sets you up for better affinity and loyalty from your fans, so that when you ship your next game, they'll be there for you because they'll say, wow, I gave these guys $10 for their game. They shipped me 100 updates. It had 10 levels at launch and it had 50. I'm buying their next game no matter what, right? You have bought them. They're a customer for life, right? How many people here are brand loyal to certain games? You know, how many people here are Blizzard, fanatics or Valve fanatics? You only drive a Honda or you only drive a BMW or what have you. We all fall into those things, right? So as content creators, think about how you're going to turn your fans into your army, right? I'm pretty old, as I've mentioned probably more times than I needed to here. But back in the old days, KISS used to refer to their fans as the KISS Army, right? They gave them dolls, they gave them lunch boxes, they gave them toys, T-shirts, posters, everything they could to make their fans committed. They were Halloween costumes, right? Everything. It had nothing to do with their music. It had to do with the experience of being a fan of KISS, who personally I kind of can't stand. But as a business person, I totally respect what those guys did. They revolutionized the music industry and brought the experience out off of the LP, which were these plastic discs we used to listen to with a needle on them to produce sound. That's another lecture. But they made themselves bigger than the record, right? Being a KISS fan meant you were part of something. You were part of a movement, right? You were part of a scene, to use a highly outdated word. But think of, how you can expand your game into being a thing. How can people get involved with that, right? A very simple way is to release the editing tools so that folks can create content for your game and expand it. Half the time they'll come up with stuff you never thought of that the public may totally gravitate to and might even think is bigger than what you did. A great example is myself. I worked on Half-Life, and less than a year and a half after the game came out, I would meet people and they'd say, oh, you work for Valve, you guys do Counter-Strike, right? And I'd be like, wait, that's what those punk mod kids made. Right? And I would say that jokingly because I like the guys who make that. They're friends of mine and obviously my colleagues. But there was a thing there that humbled you that said, Half-Life enabled, by us releasing the tools and whatnot, it allowed Min and Jess to produce Counter-Strike, which very arguably became bigger than Half-Life. And that's awesome, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That made everybody who bought the first Valve title think Valve was twice as good as we were, right? Because they got Counter-Strike and Half-Life together, right? And the community made it happen, right? We enabled the community to do that, right? We opened the door for them to do that. So as developers, that's one easy way for you to do it. Making the toys and the Halloween costumes and following KISS's example may be a little harder because it involves producing physical goods and whatnot, but you guys get the idea there, I hope. So anyway, that was it for my set pieces, and I hit my goal of not talking forever and keeping this under an hour. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Right here in the middle. Please hold your applause till the end. Actually, just hold your applause, period. It's good. So everything is case by case. It all depends, though, I think, on how you're positioning the title to your prospective customer, right, and what you're giving them. So in the case of an early access title, I would encourage folks to release only the portion or the slice of the game that they think is working best and label it as early access work in progress and charge accordingly, right? It's all about the customer's expectation. We've seen way too many examples over the history of our industry of folks setting the bar all the way to the top, spending tons of money at E3, millions of dollars on TV and print and online ad campaigns, charging you $50, and guess what? The game came out a year before it should have. And then all of a sudden, that's the end of that franchise. And it's terrible. It's a tragedy that happens all too often in this industry. But the reason that probably happened was because it was $60. It was marketed to them as this big thing. It was on the cover of their favorite magazine, etc. So their expectation was up here, and then they got something that wasn't quite done, right? So it's all in positioning and the expectation and the delivery on that promise that you're making to the customer. If the customer's expectation is in the right place, they don't feel ripped off, right, for what they got, regardless of what it is that you're giving them, if that makes sense. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm really excited about what is happening with Steam towards the end of the year. The Steam controller, the new Steam machines. Is Valve looking to really take on the console market?
I don't think that we think of it that way. I think what we're doing is, largely what Valve does is we wait and let customers tell us what they want to do with some of the stuff that we've put out there. That's kind of where we came up with the idea for early access. So, we first came up with the idea for Steam to fix the nonsense that was happening with Counter-Strike every time. Back in the old days when I was a kid, a top simultaneous player numbers were around 30 or 40,000 players for Counter-Strike. And that was probably double whatever the next game was that was out at the time. But when we would release an update for it, new maps and code fixes and whatnot, we had to put them on FTPs randomly and send everybody out to go chase them. And we would all sit there panicked as hell as we watched our simultaneous user numbers dip down to basically 0 for about 48 hours and then slowly trick back up to a higher place, right? So then you fast forward a few years, we looked at early access as a way for folks to use Steam to sort of, put their games out there and to test stuff. That was, a great thing. And customers were telling us that they wanted that ability to sort of, try games. And more importantly, our partners said, we want to be able to get funding for games, earlier on, right? And that was sort of a notion that Gabe had even very early on, was there's got to be a way for fans to be fans of games while they're into development and help the publishers, help the content creators get access to capital without having to go with their hat out to the publishers asking for a donation, right? Fast forward again, we have people telling us, we love Steam, we want to take it with us into other places in the house, right? I've got all my games on Steam, I want Steam in my living room, I want Steam in my kids' room, whatever, the case may be. And so the Steam machines and Link and the controller, which are sort of the 3 devices that we're going to offer this fall, are coming in direct response to that. It's for the existing Steam customers to be able to make their experience more portable. So if you've got your souped up gaming rig and you want to beam stuff to the house via in-game streaming for $50, you can buy Link and plug it in via HDMI into your TV and you're off to the races, right? If you want to sort of partition the experience and have a native device playing it, you can go for the Steam machine and that's there. And so, we always try to think about listening to our customers and delivering what they want. It's similar to the philosophy I was saying earlier about be on the side of your product and then you'll win, rather than figuring out whether the publisher or the developer or this side of the dev team is right or that team's right. What's right for the product, that will win, right? So this is sort of listening to what our customers want and giving them a way to extend their Steam experience. And whether or not that affects the console stuff, we don't know. But it's surely not our target to say, we must tackle, Nintendo and Microsoft. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to say, hey, there's over 100 million people on Steam, and a very large chunk of these people would like to not have to take their desktop and connect it to their TV to play their favorite Steam games on the TV. There's got to be a better solution. Oh, okay. She was up first, I think. I'll come back to everybody.
So E3 is going on. Personally, what games or franchises that you've seen excite you?
Oh, geez. That's a good question. I have been so focused on the Steam VR and the Steam hardware stuff that I haven't really been paying attention to all the latest announcements. So I'm going to punt on that one. I'm sorry. I can tell you my favorite game of all time, which is Super Mario 64, which is a sad consolation prize to that question. Anyway, go ahead.
What are your thoughts on VR and Oculus Rift and the future of Steam, for development in that direction?
Are you asking in general about the future of VR?
Or what's Steam input on that, or Valve's input on
Well, we're making a device with HTC, and we're also doing everything we can to make sure that folks who are making VR products are going to be able to do it in as open a way as possible and support all of those through Steam. VR is super, super exciting. It's also super risky because it's speculative at this point. There's basically zero installed base for customers, and these things are not going to be inexpensive units. Pricing is still TBD, I think, across the board from all of us. We're trying to figure out exactly where we can get that to for launch. But VR is the holy grail of gaming, right? A couple months after I got into the industry officially back in 1994, 95, there was this old magazine, which were these print things on papers that had pictures and words on it. They were like websites in a book, called Next Generation. And my roommate at the time, Mr. Trent Ward, the lovely and talented man, wrote a cover story for Next Gen on VR being the future of gaming. And VR is now, or something like that was the headline. Well, that was 1995. So I love Trent. He was my roommate. He's a good guy. But like we were all hoping that it was going to happen a lot sooner than it did. And one of the reasons it didn't happen was just computing power and GPUs weren't there. They're getting there now, right? And the experiences that we're putting out there and Oculus and everybody else is putting out there is way more convincing and closer to a real thing that we're all going to be playing and developing for. Who's going to do it right? How many of the systems are going to be right? Will there be a standard? Who knows, right? But that's what's so exciting about this industry is that it's always the Wild West. It's always the new frontier, right? And as long as we're all pushing in different ways to try and figure out what that thing is, something cool is going to come out of it. So many people are scratching at this that you know it's really coming this time. It's not just some next generation cover from 20 years ago that promised the future like some Buck Rogers movie, right? And my guess is some of us will do some things right, all of us will do some things wrong, and version 2 or 3 or 5 from now, they'll be in every house and we'll all, you know, make jokes about the days when we played games on screens. But, you know, it's going to be a process, and it's going to be some things that's going to be a little bumpy along the way. Those of us who are old enough to remember when 3D cards showed up, you know, the original company's rendition and 3D effects, who were the pioneers and the, you know, the early crowned kings of the 3D cards, they don't exist anymore, right? So who knows where it'll take us, but it's clearly a movement that's going on, and hopefully we'll still be in business when VR does take off, and that won't be the end of us. Let's go in the back. Just because you're wearing yellow, it's so bright and cheery.
I mentioned earlier about you were talking about doing mods and doing Greenlight workshop as a possible Greenlight you think. Is there something like that as something that you do before you sort of make it in the industry, or if not, how does that play into things like non-competitive clauses and IP ownership and things like that?
Well, I was specifically talking about workshop, right? Because you as an individual just making a hat for TF2 or something like that, I mean, if your boss is really going to get bent out of shape about the fact that you did that on the weekend, you might want to consider working at a different studio. Sorry. You know, if you're making another game with a team while you're on the studio, I can see why your boss might get a little upset with you. But it is a case-by-case basis, and read the fine print of any contract you sign. And if you can, don't sign the contract, just take the paycheck. Next question. Marcelo.
I saw recently some like independent developers complaining about the refund system because they had like game experience that were shorter than 2 hours. Do you guys have like any plans on changing the refund system for like games, independent games that don't have like a huge?
Yeah, everything's a work in progress, right? We're always trying to make it better. We had a, you know, a system that was very, very old, and times have changed. And, you know, like anything else that we do, you know, I think it's right here, right? Next question. I'll go here.
I know a lot of people have reservations about buying games on Steam that they may see and not have seen commercials for. Is there any like thoughts about putting like a free trial or like a $1 trial thing on Steam where you could possibly try out the game before you buy it?
You know, we really leave that to the content creators to decide, and that's up to them. You know, if that's a novel idea, if somebody said, I wanted to give you the first 1/10 of my game for a 1/10 of the price of the game or whatever, it's their call, man. They could totally do that. Trying to institute something like that platform-wide is probably not something that we would do for a variety of reasons. From it's really hard to do that to I'm not necessarily sure it would work for every single game. But if, you know, you wanted to do that with your game, you would, you know, give us a call or whoever your Steam publishing rep was and said, hey, we want to try this thing, and I'm sure we would work to make that happen and try and support that. Next. Let's go green. I'm going to keep my answers a little quicker because there's so many questions.
What issues or problems do you have with unaccountable democratic system in regards to like Steam reviews or Greenlight, and what do you guys have planned to help try to make that a little better?
You know, I'm not really entrenched on, you know, how folks are handling that right now. It's not necessarily directly under me, but I mean, you know, as with anything else, when there's trolls in the system, you want to try to exterminate, you know, and keep things as pure as possible. You know, there is a numbers and a volume game with where Steam has gotten now, so our ability to react and to correct everything that's going out there may not be as quick as we would like it to be or as gamers would like it to be, but we're always paying attention to that. And, you know, the biggest thing is when the community speaks up, we hear it, right? So, you know, do community-based policing of these folks and we'll catch it, you know, help enable it, you know, be vigilantes in the community is always the best thing. When there's a common thread of things that people are pointing at that we're doing wrong, we tend to react. And we try to react even when they're not. So I know that's not a super detailed answer, but philosophically, that's kind of how we approach these things. Okay, let's go you and you, because you're sitting next to each other. I don't care which one of you goes first.
Do you have any plans to revisit allowing modders to charge consumers for their products?
I hope so. Now to your buddy.
I see the advantages of doing early access, but I think a lot of issues that are being arisen because of that are games not even being released that are just going in early access. Is that
Unfortunately, it's math, right? There are good people in this world and there are bad people in this world, and there's always people that want to try and game a system. And it goes back to, I forget who asked this gentleman here's question is, you know, we always try to, you know, when there's trolls or people trying to game the system, we always try to ferret those things out, and you know, we're always looking for better ways to try and do that. We believe that at its core, there's something good there for early access that's helping developers. And if you talk to the people or read the interviews from folks who have made it to early access and published, and they talk about their positive experience, it's worth keeping to pursue that because there is something good in there. And you know, you don't want something good to get ruined just because of a few bad apples kind of thing. Again, old man phrase. Somebody, my man with the hat.
sort of building off of that, early access for some gamers has been something they've been like really wary of because of that issue, and thus as a developer I've been like, is that something I would really ever want to do? But something that just crossed my mind that might tempt me is if you guys have ever considered releasing survey tools to developers so they could survey players through Steam to actually make it more of a official open beta process in order to collect data more directly through Steam, specifically because that makes it more convenient for the user.
It's a great idea. I mean, you know, it is a it is sort of a sophisticated, you know, beta process, you know, that allows for compensation or monetization along the way. So being able to attach things, you know, for your early access customers to submit bugs more formally and in a more streamlined way, to do surveys and polling in those types of ways are all great things. And if you got time to code that up, we should talk afterwards. Yes.
So I actually have a few questions from our Twitch chat room followers.
Here we go. Everybody strap on your seatbelts.
Yes, strap on your seatbelts for sure. The first is, what does Valve do online to actively acquire customers? Do you simply rely on word of mouth or affiliates like Green Man Gaming? You don't see billboards for Valve, but you see them for lots of other game retailers.
Yeah, so, you know, there's this thing, if you look hard enough online, you'll find plenty of interviews with me talking to people like advertising outlets and stuff like that. And I use this concept called vanity marketing or vanity advertising. People are so used to, from the old days, like, if we have a product and it's going to ship, we must buy an ad, right? And that's like so old and antiquated, it's just not even funny. You know how many ads we've run for Steam online, on television, on a billboard, in a magazine, in the history of the platform since it launched 13 and a half years ago? Zero. Zero. You know how many interviews, how many demos, how many, you know, sort of co-promotional things with hardware vendors? Thousands, right? Hitting customers where they live, you know, connecting with them in those types of ways, word of mouth, what have you. That's what has worked for Steam. And in a large way, you know how many ads we bought for Dota 2? Online, on television, in print, or otherwise, same number. And Dota has 10 million or 20 million players, usually in active, I think it's 800,000 to 1 million current simultaneous players. And the International's coming up its championship with a crowd-based funded prize pool of over $13 million. So, what's that? And rising, right. I still got a month to go before we close it out. So, I mean, that just goes to show you the internet and gamers are connected. People have DVRs now. They don't watch TV commercials anymore, right? When a spam ad comes up and you're online, what do? You look for the button to close it, right? For God's sakes, people in the industry, stop wasting money on these vehicles that are antiquated, right? You're not Pepsi, you're not Coke, you're not Budweiser, you're not Chevy, you're not Ford. You don't have $100 million to spend every quarter on saturation advertising. So, sorry, that's my little, I'm on my soapbox. Again, for more of that, Google me and ad stuff. Google my name and vanity advertising, and you can find me ranting all over the internet.
Okay, the next question. If anyone can make games and it becomes easier and easier to publish, do you think that there will ever be too many games?
No.
Great. All right. The next question. The perception of Steam is game-oriented, but as more software and movies are added to Steam, how will Steam help developers effectively market these to their target consumers?
One more time.
The perception of Steam is game-oriented, but as more software and movies are added to Steam, how will Steam help developers effectively market these to their target consumers?
Well, I think the more types of apps you have on Steam, the more types of customers you'll have on Steam, and more customers you'll have in general. So I think it's just, it's growing the pool that you're able to, or growing, the base that you're able to market to and to pick from and to put your products in front of.
Does anyone? I have a few more, but let's get to
Marcel, let's come back to you, I guess. There were a few more hands in here, too. You get a second turn.
I saw in your slide that you recommended Greenlight process only for finished games. There's a reason about this?
No, I don't think so. That was a typo if it was. I don't remember where that was. Oh, geez, that should. Yeah, that's right. EA or early access is more dedicated towards a work in progress, whereas Greenlight is really more about shipping. You go back to that stat back here. Where is it? Right there. So, do the math there. What are those other guys doing now? Why did they go on to Greenlight? They're not making any money, right? They're not getting any feedback from anybody. They should be in early access. At least there's an argument for that, I would say. But that's my opinion, and take it for what it's worth. In the back.
Revisit one of the questions a little bit in the too many games question. The mobile market is just completely oversaturated with awful titles.
Uh-huh.
Is there any danger of that happening on the PC market as well?
Is there any what happening on the PC market?
As it does get easier and easier to publish PC games as well, I sort of see that danger possibly creeping in.
The danger in that is that the good titles don't get discovered. It's about aggregation, right? And that's a challenge that you saw us try to attack last fall, I believe it was, when we redid the UI and the store pages and added a bunch more ways that folks are being recommended titles and that you can customize the way you're being recommended titles. And it's just about, the fire hose is running and people want to try and pick, their diamond out of that collection of stuff. But I see that as a problem that's interesting for us to try and solve. And I think that once you try to say, we need to slow down, the rate at which creative ideas are coming out of the pipe, things go horribly wrong and we turn into sort of a dark ages, right? Even though there's a lot of junk being made, let it keep being made, right? And hopefully we can come up with a right way to aggregate the stuff that people are really responding to most and connecting customers to the things that they'll like. But, again, the whole point of this is to be prolific, ship stuff as often as possible, put those ideas out there as often as possible, and take risks as often as possible. If you had taken a poll the day that we decided to work more closely with the Counter-Strike guys and hire those guys at Valve, said all 22 of us or whatever that were there at that day, and said, how many people in this room believe that Counter-Strike is going to work, right? That it's actually a good title? half the room would have said, I don't know about this. It's really punishing. It's got no single player, all this stuff. It's really far afield of what's out there. It requires total aim and twitch at the same time, all this stuff. But the audience who was playing it was having a very clear reaction to it. And so, in all our genius wisdom of having shipped one title at the time, we weren't going to be able to tell whether or not Counter-Strike was the next biggest thing or the next biggest turd, right? And so you sort of have to let it go and let folks decide. And so I sort of, when I hear that question about are there too many games out there, I always go back to Counter-Strike, and God help us if we had thought we knew better. You just never know where that diamond's going to come from. I mean, look at half the songs that we listen to on the radio and whatnot, right? Like, we listen to the craziest stuff. Games are the same thing. Like, you just never know what's going to click with people at a certain time or in a certain place. Go ahead. Yeah, all of those things and more, right? You've got to figure out a way to break out from the crowd, right? And being organized, being focused, lining your ducks up and firing them in succession rather than scattershot, whenever they're ready. All of those things are going to be important. And, the stakes are going to rise for you guys to be marketers as well as game designers, to be your own evangelists, and to speak directly with customers, because both of those things are happening at the same time, right? In the old days, it was like, us and these guys and 4 or 5 other developers, and they had Activision and we had Sierra, and, somebody else had another publisher, and we kind of just made the game and let the publishers go duke it out, and then we would go to the bar and get drinks together. You know what I mean? But it's not like that anymore. The publishers are only doing the really big games. You guys got to do the indie games, and there's thousands of you, and 5 years from now, there'll be 10,000 of you, right? So the onus has moved from the developer, or from the publishers fighting it out over a handful of titles, to the developers having to become their own marketers and duke it out and fight for attention against thousands of other titles and other games. So that side of it is getting more and more important as time goes on, and realizing that's your guys' responsibility, as well as making the game and trying to think critically about everything you do in the game, how you're going to be able to market and talk about it, and is it valuable, is a process that you're going to have to take into consideration. I wouldn't say it should drive all your decisions, but it should be something that you're taking into consideration along the way, right? Is this going to be a cool hook? Is this going to be a turnoff, right? All those kinds of things are questions as you go through stuff. Right here.
So one of the big things when Counter-Strike Go was released, you kind of had a negative reaction from the esports scene. Professionals weren't enjoying the game. They were saying they were going to go back to source. Of course, you guys, continued to release updates. What was your mindset saying, wait, let's stop the car where it's going, because obviously people aren't enjoying it on this competitive level, which was a large of our fan base. What did Valve do to stop the car, reverse it, and get it to where it is today?
Just listen to customers, right? And start attacking things one by one. It didn't happen overnight. It was multiple releases, putting stuff out, getting feedback. Are we doing better now? Should we keep going in this direction? It's a conversation that is ongoing and always happening. I'm going to flip back to my last slide while I do this. It's a conversation you're always having with your customer, right? And just believing that line. And it's okay, right? It's okay. Counter-Strike's an established franchise. They're not quite getting this version yet. We missed some things. Let's keep working on it. Let's keep working on it.
I have a couple more questions. A few of these are actually questions that our alumni sent in that couldn't be here because they're working all over the U.S. And so one of them is, have you received any advice that has had a lasting impact on you or your career that you'd be willing to share with the group?
Sure. Geez, I'm trying to pick which piece. I mean, that one that I mentioned before about, being able to write down what you're doing on the back of a business card. And I should attribute it, since I'm going to repeat it. Dr. Bud Gardner was my writing for publication teacher at American River College in Sacramento in 1991. Anyway, he's the one who told me that and when he told me that. And I didn't realize what the heck the guy was saying when he said it. You know, it was one of those things that like the bell went off years later as I was working on something else. I was working on a cover story for a magazine or something like that, and I was struggling with it. All of a sudden, Dr. Bud's voice came in the back of my head, and it was like, ding, you know, I'm enlightened. And maybe that's another good piece of advice, is be a sponge for the information that your professors and your colleagues, your heroes are putting out there. Because the advice may not make sense right now. It may not have relevance, right? But hold on to it, because down the road, they're trying to tell you something from their experience, and there will be value in that. So sort of put it in your bag of tricks, keep it in your back pocket, don't erase it, don't dismiss it, because it could come back later on and be the best piece of advice you ever got. So yeah, I'll go there.
The next question, what do you consider Valve's competitive advantage over companies in the MOBA market like Riot and Blizzard?
I don't know. We just really don't think competitively. That's such a rat trap to go down. So I'll give my speech that way instead, is that, you know, focus on what you're doing, right? Focus on what your customers are telling you, or what, you know, what you can get out of them from the things that you've released, whether it's putting the game in early access or your trailer or everything else. If you start looking over your shoulder at what other people are doing, you're going to wind up in this really, really bad place. And there's a couple examples of games in history that I won't name who have tried to react to what was going on in the industry, and they just ended up never shipping, or shipping something broken because they remade the game 4 times without focus.
Do you think that more and more games will have advertising within games, such as Coca-Cola on a billboard? And if so, how do you think this will affect indie games?
Oh, God, I hope not. There was a question in the back. You know, there's a great book by my all-time advertising idol, David Ogilvy, who is basically the guy that Don Draper from Mad Men was modeled after. They even referenced him a couple times in the series, where they sent his book, the book I'm talking about, to Roger Sterling or whatever, to get his quote for the back of the book. They sort of did a little nice homage to him inside of the thing about that. And Roger said, "Oh yeah, I got Ogilvy's book. You should check it out, Don." And Don was like, "Ogilvy, whatever." But this guy writes this book. This guy writes this book called Ogilvy on Advertising, and it's out of print. You can find it online in all the illegal favorite places to find stuff online that's out of print. And it's a really quick read. It's like 12 chapters. It's like 150 pages, and it basically goes through the staples of how to talk about your product regardless of what your product is. How to keep it simple, how to keep it on point, how to think about the customers that you're going after, how to tell a story within your product. The guy was a genius. He started off as a college dropout from Wales, I believe, and then became a chef. And he figured out that wasn't really happening for him, so he came over to the States, and he started working for Joseph Gallup, doing polling stuff in Hollywood for Gallup and that stuff. And that worked for a while, and he decided that wasn't really working for him. So then he went to New York and tried to get a job at an agency doing advertising, and nobody would hire him, so he said, "F it, I'm going to open up my own agency." The guy ended up owning a small palace in the south of France and being married to the former Miss Yugoslavia, I think, something like that, and died, you know, being worth $800 million. So I think this guy knew something about what was going on, and he was also one of those guys that wasn't afraid to take risks. But I reread that book every couple years, and it's just one of those things that, you know, it's one place to do it, right? Another thing to do is just, you know, a quote I gave the class the other day is, "The good ones borrow and the great ones steal," right? If something worked, for God's sakes, if it's not trademark, use it, right? And the idea of an advertising vehicle or a marketing vehicle is infinitely untrademarkable, which is not a word. But, but you know, that's out there. But there are resources like that. Find a hero, I guess, is what you're saying. For me, it was Ogilvy, right? So hopefully that answers your question.
You talked about there being interesting problems within the industry you'd like to solve with digital distribution platforms and that moving forward.
In terms of,
There's been a little bit of a debate about whether digital returns are good for developers in particular.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, it's an affordance that physical items can have that hasn't existed for digital items.
It's a growing pain. I mean, that's the honest answer. You know, we're still figuring it out. Everybody's still figuring it out. I don't think there's a right and wrong. We haven't all landed on a standard. So, you know, we'll figure it out. You know, thank God we have this problem is what I would say. You know, and it's definitely not a sky is falling situation. It's not perfect today and we need to fix it. But, you know, it's a growing pain at the end of the day.
I have a
Go ahead.
question regarding crunch in the industry. So we talk in college a lot about how we should not stress ourselves out and how we should plan
Good.
in a good way. Yeah. So I was just wondering your perspective from the industry on how crunch is. Is it taking over the industry or is it like people are adjusting to it?
It's a chronic disease in the industry. You know, and some places do a better job of guarding against it than others, but it's up to you as an individual to take care of yourself, and it's an important thing. I've seen a lot of people go too far with it, and it takes a long time to come back, and some people don't come back from that. You can do a lot of damage, you know, lose your family. You know, there are a lot of sort of game widows out there in the world, unfortunately, who have just said, you're not a part of the family anymore, goodbye. You know, so divorce happens, you know, mental stability problems happen, all that kind of stuff. Physical ailments can happen. And those are, you know, kind of extreme cases, but there's enough of them out there that it's something you got to sort of just keep in mind and protect yourself. And it's not only just like taking care of your brain and your body, but as I mentioned before, it's critical to, if you're not fresh, right, and experiencing other things, whether it's film or books or, you know, taking your kids for a walk or going horseback riding or whatever, your creative energy, both as a coder, a designer, or an artist, is going to get a little flat. I guarantee you. It's not when, but if, you know. So it's just critical that you do that. You know, play the long game in everything you do, and especially, you know, taking care of yourself. You all done? Go ahead. Come on, I still got a little voice left. But I'm crackling like a 14-year-old. Next question.
How about opposing force?
How about opposing force? What about, I don't understand the question. And Randy's not here. That's a different lecture. That was his thing. It was a great thing. I got to work on it. It was a lot of fun. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a technical reason Valve can't count to 3?
Next question. And I'll warn you guys, we might be done. Go ahead. Anything else? All right, thanks a lot, you guys. Good luck to you. What's up, man?
From high on the hilltop in Big D, Southern Methodist University proudly presents the hub of SMU spirit, the Mustang Band.